Previously on the Brand Spaceship Show.
I took a picture of how close the car came from hitting me.
In the end, hopefully it looks perfect, but it really is hilariously difficult to get right.
It's chaos content.
Okay, so we had 6 cameras, stock footage, and also CGI all plugged in 45 seconds. Because of the way we like to capture content, we like to capture tons of it. So we divide and conquer on our sets. Producer Jared, everyone, he is a talented musician. Talk about this in terms of music and sound design dynamics.
The big moment should feel very big. The quiet moment should feel very quiet.
How we treat stock music and how we treat stock footage are the same.
Lost in space, but that's okay. Climb aboard the brand spaceship today.
At the end of the day, I'm just going to use round numbers. If it's $110,000 to get exactly what you want and $100,000 you're disappointed, let's be honest, it's a good idea.
So I wanted to talk about one more thing on this, leading us into the Anthem film, which is about that flexibility that you always talk about, being able to pivot to create the best blocks to build the best content, right? Originally, this spot was just the father and the daughter. The day of the shoot, you said, I actually think, seeing how the messenger is going, how the yoga person is going, that just the father and daughter is not a whole spot. And not because you can't get enough of the great footage of them, but you want more to juxtapose against, right? Going back to that, narrative highs and lows. So what did you do?
I went to Cameron, Holocene Productions. Him and Lauren were helping us produce this. And I said, Cameron, we need somebody to ride a bike. On the spot, I was just like, well, we talked about maybe this bike being useful to carry groceries. I was like, find someone who we could pretend is going to get groceries. And he's like, how much can you pay him? I'm like, well, we don't have any more budget. Give them a bike. Yeah. So I had Cameron just message a bunch of his friends and say, we need someone else. And because the other lead was a male, I said, make sure it's female so that there's that diverse look and feel amongst the stories. But the more you can capture, the better. And the reason for that, in my opinion, is because it just gives you more optionality to create a great story in post. And as you said, find the ups and the downs. We have the edit packer. This is the packer. The go was the previous one where they're together. But for the video, this video, where it's just the packer, I'm like, I don't think they're going to be happy if their launch video is, here's the bike you take your daughters to the park in. Right? It's a very limiting audience for the product itself. Felt important to me to make that change.
All right, action.
That wasn't something I even discussed with the client. That's another thing to consider, is that your goal when you're the director is just to deliver the best quality content. And I know the content was better because I saw what was happening on day one and went, day two, we need to get more. This will not be good enough. And many agencies, production companies, brands even might hear that and be like, well, I'm never working with Ryan. That sounds way too cavalier and not our taste. But I guess that's what you get when working with me. Have enough experience to see where this is going. And I now have the confidence at this point in my career to make big choices. And at the end of the day, I was like, look, if they're mad that I gave away a bike or got someone else on here, one, we won't include it in the edit. And two, I'll just pay for the bike.
That's my bike, punk!
That is the last thing I'll say. One of the things about creating great content is not just going back to the beginning, going and getting those bikes and almost dying on your way to get the bikes. It's also when you're in the midst of the shoot, there are going to be things that come up that cost money, that aren't working. My perspective, after being someone who loves to save money and not spend money, that's my default. You'll spend too much time thinking about it. So if there's any way you can spend money to solve the problem when you're on set, the amount of money that it costs to have all your crew, the amount of money it costs to fly in anybody, the cast, all this stuff, the camera equipment, etc. It's so much that a few $1,000s to solve a problem, if at all you can afford it, is something I always suggest. And frankly, if you're on the brand end and you have a director production company that says, I'm so sorry, we have an overage, it's a few $1,000s, we just couldn't stop this from happening. My suggestion to you is to kind of build that in. Consider there might be a 10% fee of just like random expense that occurs, because at the end of the day, I'm just going to use round numbers. If it's $110,000 to get exactly what you want and $100,000 you're disappointed, let's be honest, it's a good idea.
And if you take that super planned and this is a shot and that's a shot, you're not going to have this flexibility to be able to make a decision like this that ultimately turns into a weapon for your brand.
This is what they say, Jared. There's the film you write, the film you shoot, and the film you edit. Just know they're different.
All right, let's watch the full Anthem video. And this is really a great example of what we preach all the time about with the blocks method, which is, the optionality of content and iterating and making everything cohesive. So
Look at that stock footage.
Is that the Dark Knight? All right.
Groovy. Okay, we had 2 days of shooting. Primarily, the footage was captured the second day, as Jared mentioned. We have 3 main spots. All of these have different aspect ratios. So 16 by 9, 9 by 16, 1 by 1, 4 by 5, 3 different edits themselves. So you have 3 different edits, all these different platforms you can be reached by the different aspect ratios. On top of that, working with us, we store all of the footage. So you have all of the raw footage, hours of people using your bike. We also had a photographer who was on set with us the second day. So on top of that, they got 50 fully finished photos from this photographer he had tons that he took, and they took 50 selects basically. So we end up with this huge library of assets that can be used to promote this product prior to the brand launching the 2 products. And that is the blocks method in a nutshell, right? Executing as much as you possibly can in the shortest period of time. All right. The last thing I will say that we did is, and this was mentioned, go ahead and pull up one of the CGI shots. And then we also did a bunch of cut downs with a CGI spot as well. Cool. Here's the reason we did CGI on this. We actually didn't talk about doing this at the beginning. And the reason we didn't talk about doing this because, as was mentioned previously, the client's goal was to capture people authentically enjoying riding the bike, right? As you can imagine, the least human thing is a computer-generated image. So they're like, we don't think we want CGI. What ended up happening is that we pitched basically having the bike itself on a white backdrop. I won't get into the details of how that was going to integrate into these edits. It just didn't end up working on set.
Windy.
It was taking too long.
It was windy.
What's that?
It was windy.
It was windy. It was windy, and it was ripping apart the backdrop, and it was just totally ruining the day. It was one of these things where it was the best example of planning something out and it not working. And I went, here's my suggested solution. And I'm texting our team about, can we solve this in post, right? Which you'll hear people say, like, solve it in post, and everyone says that's a bad idea. For us, because our post is our default, it's something I lean into more and more and more. So I text and I say, can we just do this with CGI? And everyone's like, yeah. I'm like, okay, done. We wrap the white backdrop, and what ends up happening is that we're creating these shots on the backdrop for these commercials. And then it goes, oh, well, ping the client. For a little bit more money, we could have CGI spots too, and screen grabs of the CGI. Does that sound good? And they're like, yeah. So they got a lot more content. We got a little bit more money. And it really was just solving a problem that we couldn't solve on set. Again, going back to the fact that the goal with the blocks method, the goal, in our opinion, at Mile 80 with creating content for your brand is getting as many assets as possible. And that often includes a bunch of different I'm going to call them textures, right? So it's everything from an iPhone to CGI, the high end and the low end, all combined. All of these things, including stock footage, stock music versus composed, they all have their place. And your goal as a brand when you work with an agency is finding the agency that knows what the place is for all these pieces. Your goal as the agency, your goal as the production company is to become good enough at the craft to know when and where to place all the different tools.
And I started thinking about like, there is still so much from the blocks method perspective. There's so much left on the table here in terms of future iterating. 15-second spots of all the individual stories, right? Maybe there's a combined spot of just the iPhone footage for each, right? Since you've established your brand as high quality with all these spots, now there's something fun on social. It's just iPhone stuff, right? And then maybe there's a spot with just drone foot. Like you can go on and on and on and on.
I agree. What I see as the future of brands creating high-end content is really investing a lot of money in like a week a year, right? Investing a solid amount of money to go shoot a library worth of content and then edit and re-edit and re-edit and re-edit and repost, etc., for the rest of the year. And it gets really deep. The amount that you can go back and upcycle your content, it's surprising to even me. We always come up with new ways we can do it. And most brands haven't even started to think about it. Most production companies haven't even started to think about it. And last thing I will say on this is the big benefit of that type of production where you maybe shoot and then you edit for the rest of the year is that there's alignment between the agency / production company and the brand. We talk about this often. If the footage being captured in a week equals a year's worth of post for the production company, they're aligned for a long-term engagement with the brand. If instead the goal is the maximum amount of money made from the production, the goals are misaligned. The goal of the brand is the most amount of content distributed on social so they can be seen everywhere, so they can A/B test, so that they can figure out what works for marketing. We can't align our goals, and it's just that it doesn't happen that often. Thanks for being here. We just talked about Velotrick. We love working with Velotrick. Call us again, Velotrick Snaps. Hope to work with you again, create more content, build up that asset library, continue to grow that brand collaboratively with our incentives aligned.